Hello and welcome to my weekly podcast, Through the Bible in 10 Years. Today we are in Revelation chapter 17. Revelation chapter 17, I think, is perhaps the key to understanding what the book of Revelation is all about. We'll see whether you agree with me. Well, let's dive right in with verse 1. And one of the seven angels, the ones having the seven bowls, came and spoke with me, saying, Come, I will show you the judgment of the prostitute, the fornicator, whatever we want to use there, the great prostitute, the one sitting upon many waters, with whom the kings of the earth fornicated, and the ones inhabiting the land have become drunk or became drunk from the wine of her fornication. Now, I've used the word fornication. The word in verse 2 is porneia, which we know from Paul's writings because he tells, for example, the Thessalonians to abstain from sexual immorality. It seems to refer to a wide variety of possible sexual immoralities, possibly including adultery, although some debate whether it's distinct from adultery. It probably does not refer to premarital sex. That's probably not what it refers to. I haven't, as I've studied this word over the years, I've not found good evidence that it, I think the reason we think that is because in the King James it's translated with the word fornication. And fornication came to mean premarital sex in certain circles, but the word generally means sexual immorality. It could include, I think, for example, bestiality, incest. Basically, look at Leviticus 18, and you'll have a fair sense of what porneia probably refers to. Now, the woman here, she is a pornes, which suggests that she is perhaps a prostitute. That doesn't play into the premarital sex thing because it would be primarily married men. I suppose it could also be unmarried men visiting prostitutes, but in the ancient world, I suspect it would have heavily been married men. And that was not considered adultery, I might add. There was a double standard, as there has been throughout most of history between men and women. It was not adultery for a man to sleep with another woman. It was adultery for a woman to sleep with another man. Not unfair, not Christian. But so she is a prostitute, this woman here. Who is she? We're going to find out that she is Rome. When we get to the, now she could be many empires, I suppose, and if I remember correctly, Kester may lean in that direction. But in this chapter, the prostitute is a specific reference, I would say, to the Roman Empire. And she sits on many waters. Well, we're going to find out what those many waters are when we get to the end of this chapter. Because down at the in the final paragraph of the chapter, let me see if I can find it very quickly. Down here, verse 15. Verse 15, and he says to me, the waters that you see, where the prostitute is sitting, they are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. So the Roman Empire sits upon the world. Of course, not the whole world, because there was China at this time and there were other kingdoms in the world. But in terms of the focus of the world, the inhabited world of concern to the biblical authors, it was the Mediterranean basin primarily. And in that Mediterranean basin, there were many peoples: the Scythians, the incipient Germans, the Parthians off to the east, and so forth. The Numidians, well, they didn't have interaction with them. Never mind, forget that. I was saying Nabatean is what I was thinking. But so this prostitute, Rome, sits upon many waters because Rome is over a vast amounts of territory at this time. And so the angel invites John to see this great prostitute of Rome sitting upon all the nations of the world. And the kings of the earth are drunk. They have committed sexual immorality. They have fornicated with Rome, and they've made commerce with Rome. And those dwelling on the earth have become drunk from the wine of her fornication. And again, we would not be wrong to see economic interaction with Rome here, the interplay between trade, other kingdoms, and the trade with Rome. Again, that system is not the system of the kingdom. There's a tendency in Christian circles to almost to make capitalism a holy thing, a Christian thing. Well, you're not a capitalist. Well, you're an atheist. There's almost that dynamic, and I want to go ahead and give my philosophical position is that I do personally believe that a carefully monitored and moderated capitalism is in fact the optimal way to optimize society, a regulated and moderated capitalism. So I consider myself a capitalist. However, it would be very anachronistic and syncretistic potentially to see capitalism in the Bible in any heavy form. Certainly the book of Revelation does not see in any way the capitalistic system of the Roman Empire as being friends with the kingdom of God. In fact, it's quite the opposite. The capitalistic system of the Roman Empire is seen as part of the evil empire, as it were, within the book of Revelation. I would say part of the sexual immorality, as a symbolic sexual immorality of the Roman Empire. So we should be very careful about intertwining capitalism too much with our sense of what core Christian values or faith are. That's actually, I would say, a syncretism, a modern syncretism, American syncretism, where we've mixed things of the world with things of God, a little too close for comfort, possibly. And again, I say that as somebody who believes in a carefully regulated and moderated capitalism. So I am a capitalist, but it would be bad exegesis to think that the Bible endorses capitalism in its modern form. The New Testament actually is not very friendly on the whole toward the idea of money. Render unto Caesar that which is Caesar basically says the economic system of Caesar is completely foreign to the kingdom of God. It's a different world. Go ahead and give Caesar his coin back. That has nothing to do with us. Well, okay. Verse 3. And the angel carried me away into the desert, into the wilderness in the spirit. And there I saw a woman sitting upon a scarlet or red beast. This is the prostitute. This is Rome. And she's sitting on the beast. And who is the beast? Well, the beast is he's often called the Antichrist, but of course Revelation doesn't call him the Antichrist. This is the beast from the sea, I assume. And this beast is full of names of blasphemy. So this beast does not in any way represent the things of God. The beast has 7 heads and 10 horns. And the woman was clothed in purple and scarlet. And she was engoldened with gold and precious stone and pearls. I love the word for pearl in Greek is margarita. Anyway, who knew? But anyway, she is bedecked in gold and precious stone. And so this is Rome, as we're going to find out soon enough. And she is holding a golden cup in her hand, full of abominations and the impurities of her sexual immorality. Boy, John does not think highly of the Roman Empire. I think we have to conclude that here for sure. Verse 5, and upon her forehead a name having been written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of the prostitutes, and the mother of the abominations of the earth. So Rome is seen as the not the source of all evil, but as a overwhelming fount of evil. Come, thou fount of evil. The Roman Empire here is seen as the kind of the source of the worst aspects of the world in which John lives. And she has this written on her forehead. Of course, this is not a literal woman, and so it's not a literal mark on her forehead. And I would just want to reiterate that the mark of the beast and the mark of the elect in Revelation is not a literal mark. It's not a tattoo or something like that. It's a spiritual mark, as it were. It's not something you can see. It's not a microchip from Bill Gates. So, verse 6, and I saw the woman being drunk from the blood of the saints, and from the blood of the witnesses of Jesus. The word for witnesses is martyrs. It's tempting to translate this from the blood of the martyrs of Jesus, but that's not what the word did not yet mean martyr. It will. And in fact, probably Revelation had something to do with the word martyr coming to mean martyr. At this point in history, however, it probably just means the witnesses of Jesus, but witnesses in death. And it's quite possible that by the time that John is writing this, that a number of the disciples, apostles had already died, and that a number of Christians had died. We know that Nero, for example, around the year 64, Nero put many Christians to death in Rome as an excuse. He had been blamed for the fire of Rome. He probably didn't do it, but he was blamed for it, and so he deflected the blame, as is often the case, upon Christians, and had put many of them to death. And so there'd been some bloodshed by this time. There was no official Roman policy to kill Christians. I think that's important to realize, because we picture Christians living in fear day in and day out of Romans knocking on their door. But there was no sustained policy. This is at least the best historical research suggests that there was no sustained policy of persecution on Christians at this time. That came in fits and starts. It was often local. So Christians, yes, they did get martyred. Yes, they did suffer, but it was not a thoroughgoing policy. It was a here and there as the occasion arose. But enough people had died by the time the book of Revelation was written. By the way, I haven't fully followed the debate, but the consensus seems to be right now that there wasn't a sustained persecution of Christians under Domitian either, which is the traditional time that it's thought Revelation was written. I might say, and we'll talk about this in a second, I might say that I've wondered for a long time whether Revelation might have been written and edited to where it was written at an earlier period, and then that it reached its final form a little bit later, which would not be a problem at all. I mean, why would that be a problem? I can't think of any reason why that would be a problem, other than sometimes we picture, a biblical author sitting down, turning off their brain, and then their hand starts to move as God tells them things to write. That's not the likely way inspiration worked. Not least because the different books of the Bible have different styles of the authors and different personalities, even different angles and perspectives on things. So anyway, so the idea that a biblical document might have gone through stages in reaching its final form, I can't see where, I really don't understand why that would be a problem for inspiration, because God can inspire an editing process. What's important is how it ends up, right? Well, anyway, the final form, as it were. Well, so it's quite clear that Rome did drink from the blood of the saints. And I marveled, continuing on with verse 6, and I marveled, a great marvel, having seen her. This is, again, I've said several times that there are Hebraisms. To marvel a great marvel is, again, an indicator that the author of Revelation is a Aramaic speaker, that's his first language. And I might add also that the book of John does not in any way give us this impression, the Gospel of John. The Gospel of John does not in any way lead us to think that its author has underlying Semitisms of that sort. Yet another piece in the puzzle of why It is generally thought by scholars that the Gospel of John and the book of Revelation probably weren't written by the same person. So I marveled a great marvel. By the way, a lot of versions would see this as part of the next paragraph. That with the "and I marveled" is the beginning of the next paragraph. And I marveled a great marvel. Verse 7, and the angel said to me, why have you marveled? Why haven't you DC comicked? Just kidding, bad joke. I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast that's carrying her, the beast that has 7 heads and 10 horns. And now we come to the decoder ring of the book of Revelation. Maybe. Let's see what this is all about. Verse 8, the beast that you saw was and is not and is about to come up out of the abyss, and it departs into destruction. It was, it's not now, and it's about to come up. Now here, remember the imagery we saw earlier on in the chapter on the beast. Which chapter was that? Was it chapter 12? Let me pause for station identification. Chapter 13. Missed it by that much. Back in chapter 13, we were introduced to the beast from the sea. And the beast from the sea, if you remember, it had a mortal wound that was now healed. And so the beast from the sea, we reckoned, was somebody from the past who had died, but had come back to life, mimicking Jesus, right? The beast from the sea mimics the resurrection. Now, whether or not we should take this as a expectation of a literal person who comes back from the dead, that would be an unpleasant interpretation. We'll talk about that in a second. But so we might want to take the resurrection of the beast as more of a symbolic resurrection rather than a literal resurrection. That's certainly the easier conclusion to reach. Okay, so the beast that you saw was, but is not now. So they existed before. They do not exist now, but they're about to return. They're going to come from the pit of the abyss, and they're going to go to destruction. And those who inhabit upon the earth, they will be amazed. They will marvel. That is, who will marvel? Those whose name has not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world. Now we saw this creation of the world expression earlier on in a previous chapter, and there we debated what it was referring to. That was back in chapter 13. And we debated whether it was the lamb slain from the foundation of the world or whether it was their names in the book of life from the foundation of the world. And in chapter 13, from the foundation of the world, creation of the world, was close to lamb. And so going with the whatever's nearest is most likely what it's talking about. I leaned in chapter 13 toward the lamb slain from the foundation of the world. But here, it's clearly their name is in the book of life from the foundation of the world. And we do get a predestination vibe from this chapter, election vibe. In the end, I tend to see election language as part of the coinage of the realm, as it were, of that day, that this is the way they talked. We get into theological problems if we assume that God has determined who's going to be saved and who's going to be damned, which is of course what John Calvin thought and Augustine. If we take that interpretation, then it turns out that God is the author of evil. And now God did create the possibility of evil, but in my theological system, if there's not some distance between God and evil, then it doesn't make any sense to say that God is love. If God kind of arbitrarily decides who's going to fry and who isn't. And I think there are passages in the Bible that clearly seem to indicate that people get to that this is a decision that God has people make. 1 Timothy 2 says that God wants everyone to be saved. Well, if God wants everyone to be saved, and he determines it, then everybody will be saved. But everybody doesn't seem to be saved, and therefore it would seem to be the case that there is some human element in the equation. Of course, the easy way to take care of it is simply to say, to kind of take Romans 8 and say God foreknew who was going to choose him, and he predestined them accordingly. But we might not have to go into those kinds of theological depths of rationalization to simply say that there is predestination language in the Bible, and that it was part of the culture. The culture was very fatalistic, in that world, and so and that's a way of expressing the kind of knowledge of God. And of course, God did know who was going to be saved, right? And so this verse doesn't say how their names got in the book of life, for example, but there is a sense that God knew who was going to be saved at the end. And often in other places, like in Ephesians, what I would say of Ephesians 1 is that it's more the plan that's predestined, the group, as it were, that's predestined, rather than the individuals who are in the group. Well, those are the debates of Arminians and Calvinists over the years, as we try to fit all these pieces together. But definitely there are those who will be saved, and those who will be saved are known by God. And it's those who aren't saved, that is, those who have not repented, those who have not chosen to serve God. Those are the ones who we might say their name's not written in the book. Is there an actual book in heaven? Well, again, I think that's probably a metaphor. I doubt there's an actual book. So the whole expression is figurative, as it were. But they will marvel. Now, the Christian shouldn't marvel at the beast. The Christian should expect empire to persecute them. The Christians should not expect the nation, the kingdom of the world. They should not expect the kingdom of the world to treat them nicely. There's always a danger with what we might call nationalism that confuses the kingdom with the worldly kingdom. This is a danger in America. It was a danger in Nazi Germany. There needs to be some distance between our sense of the government and our sense of the kingdom. We should put some space between those. Because, and I think this is one of the undertakings away from Revelation, is that the empire is, we should expect, our default expectation should be for the empire to be hostile to the kingdom and to those whose marks of Christ or marks of God are in their foreheads. We should expect the kingdom to persecute us. It's those who are not in the kingdom who marvel at the beast, who don't have their names in the book of life. And they marveled seeing the beast that was and is not and will be present. Again, mortal wound, dead, but now alive again. Who is this person? Verse 9, wait and see. Now, here is the mind that has wisdom. We're about to get there. Here it is. And now the climax of the whole book of Revelation. Not really, but we're about to, this is the secret. What have we been talking about all this time? The 7 heads are 7 hills. Okay, there is no one hearing the book of Revelation when John sends this to Thyatira and Ephesus. Anybody in that world, the first audience, the original audience, the intended audience of Revelation, there is no one hearing that phrase who doesn't think, ding, this is about Rome. Okay, this is about Rome. The 7 heads are 7 hills where the woman sits upon them. Rome, 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 your boat. Okay, so verse 10, and there are 7 kings. 5 have fallen. The one is now. The other has not yet come. What? Well, 5 kings. So who were the first 5 emperors of Rome? They were Augustus, and there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus that the world should be taxed, right? Augustus is the emperor when Jesus is born. Tiberius. Tiberius was the emperor as Jesus grew up. Caligula, bad guy. Caligula tried to desecrate the temple, setting up a statue of himself there, and he was thankfully assassinated before he could try to implement it. There would have been a revolution long before 66 if, well, I don't know, what would that have done? Anyway, Caligula, bad guy. Claudius. Claudius is the one that kicked the Jewish Christians out of Rome. We find about this in Acts, because Priscilla and Aquila have been kicked out of Rome by Claudius. And then Nero. So 5 kings have fallen. Nero is the one I think we should pay attention to, because of course we have already seen that the number 666 is, if you take Caesar Nero and you treat the letters as in Aramaic as numbers, you get 666. So we have had lots of imagery. I mean, it just, in terms of the first meaning of Revelation. Now, there may be other meanings to piggyback on it, but it seems to me that it's very clear. The book of Revelation is primarily talking about the Roman Empire, and that Nero is standing very strongly in the background of what we're talking about here. Nero, of course, committed suicide. It was very difficult for people to believe that. And I've talked about back, I think, in chapter 13, how there was a rumor that Nero had not really died, or that he was going to come back again from the east with the Parthians, and he was going to pound Rome to get his vengeance. I was looking in preparation for today at Sibylline Oracle number 5, which many think is filled with allusions to this story of Nero returning from the east. And so, and we have, I think, maybe Augustine alludes to this, Dio Chrysostom maybe alludes to this myth of Nero returning from the east. And so this idea that Nero is dead, but he's coming back, was in the water apparently within the Roman Empire. Now again, there are 2 ways to take this. The one is that John actually believed that Nero was coming back. That's not pleasant because he's not. The other interpretation, however, is to see Nero as a type of the beast, or Nero as an archetype of those who oppress Christianity, and to take the return of Nero symbolically of any time that empire oppresses Christianity. Well, I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but so one of the five have fallen, one is now. Now, there was a year of 3 emperors, a year 69, and I read Mulholland, I think it was, who didn't think it was plausible to suggest that Revelation just kind of overlooks them. I personally have found that fairly plausible, because it's unsettled. Who's going to be the emperor? It doesn't really, the next emperor doesn't settle down until Vespasian. Vespasian then would be, in this interpretation, the one who is now. And Vespasian started the Jewish war. Well, he didn't start it, but he was the general who was first responding to the Jewish war. The Jewish war began with a Jewish revolt, a revolt of independence, where the Jews wanted independence from Rome, which started actually under Nero. Vespasian was the general who went and started the siege of Jerusalem. Now, Vespasian's son Titus was the one that actually completed that siege. So it was under Titus that Jerusalem was destroyed, and it was under Titus that the temple was destroyed. Vespasian was called back, as it were, to become the next emperor. And so, if it makes sense to ignore the year of fluctuation, that is the year where it wasn't certain who was going to be emperor, Galba, Otho, Vitellius, these 3 emperors, none of them stuck. Vespasian is the next secure emperor. Now, the timing is bad, of course. This is where I think the timing is probably why um, um, both Kester and Mulholland and N.T. Wright. I'm now following his Revelation for Everyone. Very nice stories. I don't find him to be quite as. Of course, it's not a commentary proper. It's more of a devotional book, it seems to me. I don't find him to provide the kind of detailed interpretation that I'm looking for as I prepare for these podcasts. But all of them don't go down this road that I've gone to very much, because tradition has it that the book of Revelation was written during Domitian. And the imagery within Revelation of there being no temple, I think, definitely fits with a later, or at least a post 70 date for the book of Revelation. I think it was John Robinson. He wrote a book a long time ago, decades ago, called Redating the New Testament, in which he argued that the book of Revelation was written before the destruction of the temple. And I'm not arguing that, but I have wondered, okay, and now Schenck theories that he's never published. I have wondered for several decades now, probably, well, I'll say for 20 years, I have wondered if perhaps the book of Revelation unfolded in stages, and that I wondered if here we are in chapter 17 at ground zero of the book of Revelation, that we are in this middle part getting kind of the beginnings of the writing of Revelation, and that perhaps that revelation started with a sense that a Nero, I'll say, was going to return at some point. Now, it's tempting, and I think I may have even hinted at this in my New Testament survey. I'm not sure. I've also, by the way, written a book, Letters to the Churches, that has a chapter on the book of Revelation, the early church letters from the churches. And I have a chapter on Revelation. I may suggest there the question, did John see Domitian as the eighth? But I'm going to back off on that suggestion. I think we probably are best suited to think of the eighth as anyone in the future that is Nero redivivus, or Nero returned. And there will be lots of Nero returned. Stalin was a Nero returned. Hitler was a Nero returned. But so the 5 have fallen, Nero, 1 is now. I'm going to go with Vespasian, and another is not yet come. And whenever let me continue. I used the word eighth, but I haven't gotten to that part of the scripture. Let's keep going. So when the other has not yet come, and whenever he shall come, it is necessary for him to remain a little bit. And who is that? Verse 11. And the beast that was and is not, he himself is an eighth. Okay, an eighth. Not the eighth. The eighth would have been Titus by this reckoning, but an eighth. Now, Domitian, if the book of Revelation is primarily talking about its own time, then Domitian could be an eighth, a kind of person who represents or embodies Nero again. But again, I think we're best served to think of the eighth as any antichrist who comes, any empire king that oppresses the faith, I think is probably the best place for us to go in our application of this here. So this eighth person is from the 7, and he goes to destruction. Verse 12. And the 10 horns that you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom, but they are receiving authority as kings for 1 hour. Verse 13. These have one purpose, and they give to the beast power and authority. Now, 10 here I think it's an image that's taken from Daniel, if I remember correctly. But this, I do not think that we can identify 10 kingdoms. I remember when I was growing up, Hal Lindsey thought, could this be the European Common Market? Because there were actually 10 participants in the European Common, in the EU, as it were. This is yet another instance where Lindsey appears to be wrong. Again, I'm sure Lindsey's a nice guy, but I don't know of any prediction he's made that has actually come true. And this is, of course, the danger with prophecy teaching, because everybody's been wrong so far on any prophecy that they've connected to the contemporary world, as far as we know. No, again, I could be wrong. This is my opinion. You're welcome. I welcome feedback if you can think, here's a place where the prophecy was right. But I think it's all pointless speculation. There are more than 10 in the EU now. And of course, these things are dangerous because they tend to reinforce the politics we already believe in. I mean, it's no mistake that if you follow Hal Lindsey, he has a particular political view and he reads it into prophecy. And so what this does is it elevates personal political opinion to the level of God. This is highly dangerous. This is highly dangerous because it leads you to vilify the opposing political party as evil, as devilish. And in fact, he's been wrong on everything. That means that all the political biases, if there are, and again, maybe I'm wrong, but if there are political biases that are expressed in these prophecy opinions, they have all been wrong. Think through. Because the emotion continues long after the head realizes, oh, well, that wasn't Gog and Magog. But you still have associated with, oh, that other party is the party of evil, when in fact, you were wrong every time. Which if you can get that down to the emotional level, you have to ask yourself, does that mean that the emotions I associate with my politics are fundamentally flawed? And that in fact, I'm still feeling the same way. I keep changing the figures. I keep changing the characters. But my feelings of, oh, that other party is evil. What if the fact that everything has been wrong indicates that feeling is wrong, and that in fact you are fundamentally wrong in your political outlook? I mean, that is one of the consequences of this sort of reasoning. Just think of how connecting prophecy to current events misguides your political perspective. Therefore, we need to completely throw that away. We need to throw away any attempt to connect the book of Revelation to specific political bodies today. We need to throw that away because otherwise it's going to mess up your perspective. Okay, well, so let's take this as symbolic rather than of a specific time and place, and conclude that there are many beasts. Throughout history, there have been many beasts from the sea. These are powerful political leaders who oppose the kingdom of God, and that there are kingdoms, 10 kings, that empower these evil, again, not specific 10, but there are kings that empower beasts to oppose the people of God. And those smaller constituents empower the bigger constituents. Okay, verse 14. These with the Lamb make war. They will make war with the Lamb, and they always do, right? They always make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb will overcome them every time. Anytime the Lamb will overcome them. Now, that doesn't mean that we're always going to escape. You know, the confessing church in Germany suffered under Hitler. Those who truly stand up for the Lamb will often suffer. But we know, and this is the point of the book of Revelation, God wins. The Lamb will overcome. The Lamb will always overcome. It may not always be while I'm alive, but in history, the Lamb will overcome. And in eternity, the Lamb will overcome, because he is Lord of lords, King of kings, and Lord of lords. He is Lord of lords and King of kings. And those with him are called and chosen and faithful. And that's the side that we want to be on. Even if we suffer in this life, we want to be on the side of the Lamb. Okay, verse 15. Now we're going to get, I've already looked at this briefly, but now we're going to get, again, more decoder ring stuff. Verse 15. And he says to me, the waters that you saw, where the prostitute sits, are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. So these are all of the people that support the beast, that support the empire, or in this case, support Rome. Verse 16. And the 10 horns that you saw, and the beast, these will hate the prostitute, and will make her desolate and naked. See, this is interesting, because the beast has been associated with Rome, and yet here the beast is going to oppose Rome. And there's where, again, that sense of Nero as coming back to get his due from the east. Remember, the Euphrates will dry up, we saw in the previous chapter, making way for Nero to return from the east. And Nero will have his vengeance on Rome. So Rome will get her due. Now, we might say that kingdoms, evil empires, always crumble eventually. And they often crumble from within. They often crumble because evil is inconsistent with itself. Evil is self-centered. Evil is individualistic. Evil is narcissistic. And so when you have a bunch of narcissists all out for themselves, they may pool together, for a short term, but eventually the drive for each of them to be the number one will cause it, to disintegrate eventually. And so the beast, even though he's from Rome, will eventually unravel Rome. And so the kings will come with the beast, and Babylon will fall. They will eat the flesh of her, and they will burn her with fire. I don't know if that's an allusion. Would the audience have thought of the fire of Rome and Nero? Maybe, I don't know. It's a possible allusion. Verse 17, for God gave into their hearts to do his purpose, and to do one purpose, and to give their kingdom to the beast. Interesting here, again, language of predestination. Certainly, God hardens Pharaoh's heart. For my theology, it's important for me, theologically, to say Pharaoh was not predestined to be hardened, that he had a shot. And in the same way that the beast was not predestined with this purpose, but that he had a shot at salvation. In my theology, God hardens people who've already made that choice. That is to say, that God can use those like Cyrus or like Pharaoh or like Nero, that God can use those individuals, but they had a shot. This is important for my theology, that God's prevenient grace at some point, however fleeting, it may not have been a very long shot, but that they had a chance to be saved, but they chose not to, and that their heart was hardened, and that there was no possibility of them repenting, and God knew this, and God used them. And so that's the way I tend to take this language. You can say it's a cop-out, but we all work out our systems, right? Because the Bible doesn't work these things out for us. These are the gaps in between passages. So God gave this purpose to do in their hearts, in their hardened hearts, this one purpose, to give their kingdom to the beast until will be completed the words of God. And so, again, I don't know if John saw this as a specific events of that day. That's difficult, because if he did, they didn't seem to happen. And so I think it's much easier to take these things as archetypal and symbolic, that there are times when beasts arise, there are times when beasts persecute the church, and then eventually God unravels those kingdoms. He brings them to fall in on themselves. This is what happens to wickedness. Wickedness eventually falls under its own weight. Verse 18, and the woman whom you saw is the great city, Rome, as we've said throughout, Rome, the one having the kingship over the kings of the earth. Rome will eventually fall. And of course, that's what we're going to see in the next chapter. In the next chapter, we will see fallen Babylon the Great. And so we have a prediction here that Rome will eventually fall, and perhaps a prediction here that all evil empires will eventually fall. Well, we've had Revelation 17. I could be wrong on my opinions. These are my opinions. I'm doing my best to wrestle with the evidence that we have before us. Revelation chapter 7 on Through the Bible in 10 Years.